She stepped into the towering skyscraper with trembling hands and scuffed sneakers, clutching a fragile hope for a chance to change her life. But the moment the receptionist read her name, Monroe, the janitor's daughter, she only offered a derisive laugh. The security guard nearly had her escorted out of the lobby before she could even sit down. What was supposed to be an interview, a doorway to a brighter future, had turned into a humiliation, until the CEO burst in, furious over a crisis no one else could solve. And in that instant, the girl, the janitor's daughter, humiliated, dismissed, and underestimated, rose to her feet and did something that would alter everything forever. That morning, golden sunlight poured across the sidewalk in front of Bright Tech Innovations' gleaming glass facade. A soft breeze drifted through the perfectly trimmed shrubs, highlighting the divide between the outside world, where ordinary people belonged, and the realm of power and prestige within. Alicia Monroe paused at the top of the marble steps and inhaled deeply, tasting dust and sunlight. The slender black young woman wore a worn silver-gray blazer that fell loosely on her frame, a treasured hand-me-down from Mrs. Thompson, the kind neighbor who had gifted it to the smartest kid in the whole neighborhood. Her canvas sneakers, patched and fraying, squeaked softly with every step, but Alicia knew those scuffs and tears were proof of her refusal to give up. In her hand was a stack of resumes carefully tucked inside a cheap plastic folder. Each page had been typed on an outdated library computer and printed out with the spare change her mother, Martha Monroe, a nearly 60-year-old black woman, quietly saved after every night shift cleaning this very building for 28 years. Every sheet represented their shared dream, to break free from doubt and face the world without shame. The revolving glass doors swung open, reflecting Alicia's trembling silhouette under the grand chandeliers. Inside, dark suits and polished dress shoes moved with confident purpose, their voices echoing upper-crust certainty, only deepening Alicia's feeling of being an outsider. Nobody paid her any mind, or rather, nobody believed a small black girl in borrowed clothes and beat-up sneakers belonged here unless she was carrying a mop. But today, Alicia carried only her ambition, to become a legitimate analyst, to sit at a conference table, to be heard and judged by her own intellect. Though her hands shook and her heart pounded in her petite chest, she refused to back down. Partly for her mother, partly for herself, she had dreamed of this moment for so long. With each step deeper into the vast lobby, she felt the eyes brush past her, the receptionist's sidelong glance, a few well-dressed candidates waiting in leather chairs, the measured click of high heels worn by the blonde managers striding by, all silently declaring, "You don't belong here." Surrounded by sparkling lights, the scent of luxury perfume, and soft ambient music, Alicia kept her gaze forward and walked straight to the reception desk, lifting her chin just a bit higher. Underneath her nerves, pride and fierce determination burned. She would not let her background or her skin define her. With every footfall, she reminded herself, "Martha Monroe's daughter. Today, I reach for my dream, no matter how hard the world tries to push me out the door." And with that, Alicia Monroe's journey to bridge two worlds truly began. It was as if the very air in the main lobby thickened the moment Alicia stopped at the reception desk. Under the harsh white lights, every polished marble tile reflected her scuffed sneakers, a naked, glaring contrast between poverty and the splendor of privilege. Alicia tightened her grip on her stack of resumes, trying to steady her breath, but her heart raced when she felt the receptionist's gaze land on her. Rachel Evans, a white woman in her 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, vibrant red lipstick, a form-fitting dress and a matching blazer, looked up. Her sharp eyes scanned from Alicia's simple black hair down to the faded sneakers, then lingered on the oversized blazer. Rachel's lips curved into a faint, mocking smile, thin enough to cut into someone's pride. Mustering all her courage, Alicia offered a polite smile and softly said, "Good morning. I have an interview for the analyst position at 10:30. Monroe, Alicia Monroe." The instant Alicia spoke her name, Rachel froze, her brows arching dramatically as if she'd heard a bizarre joke. In that heartbeat, the practiced friendliness drained from her expression, replaced by a venomous grin, as though she intended to make the entire lobby her private stage. Rachel glanced around, then deliberately raised her voice so a few nearby white-collared employees could hear. "Monroe, huh? Don't tell me you're the janitor's kid. Martha Monroe's daughter who cleans the basement, is that right?" The lobby seemed to shudder with cold. The men, waiting in leather chairs, exchanged elbows and whispered, stifling laughter. A blonde assistant nearby sneered, half pitying, half amused, as if this were some unwilling entertainment. Alicia fought to keep her composure, smiling though her hands clenched the folder's edges and her lower lip trembled. She knew that in that moment, her clothes, her face, her very skin and background were laid bare for all those prying eyes. But Rachel pressed on. She flipped through her appointment book without taking her eyes off Alicia, then spoke slowly, each word dripping like acid. "Are you sure you're on the interview list? Here, we don't hire janitorial staff for analyst roles. Maybe you're in the wrong place? Some spots just aren't meant for everyone." At her final word, the air grew even more suffocating. A young man nearby let out an audible laugh. "Look at her, Monroe Special Edition, showing up dressed like she's applying for a temp job." Another whispered to his friend, making sure Alicia could hear, "Yep, that's Martha's kid. I've seen them eating lunch together in the parking garage." Alicia felt a chill race down her spine. Those offhand jabs cut into her pride, not only hers but her mother's, and the countless generations of black workers who'd silently endured such scorn here. Yet within Alicia's deep eyes, beneath the hurt and anger, a thin flame of defiance still flickered. Though every gaze tried to push her back, she refused to bow her head. Rachel snapped the book shut, crossed her arms, and leaned against the desk. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but carved from stone. "Please have a seat. I'll check the list again." But Alicia clearly saw there was no intent to help, only doubt, ridicule, and an unspoken verdict. "Here, your skin and your background are unforgivable sins." Behind Rachel, a few curious glances lingered, whispering as if Alicia's presence were a joke, an unwelcome disruption in the flow of high society life. In that grand marble hall, Alicia felt like a speck of dust, small, scrutinized, yet perhaps with enough force, ready to blow away every prejudice. The air at the reception desk grew even heavier after Rachel's mocking remark. Before Alicia could muster a response, heavy, measured footsteps sounded to her right. From the shadowed entryway emerged Mike Dalton, the morning shift security guard. A burly white man whose tight uniform only emphasized his intimidating bulk, his expression as cold and uninviting as steel. He stalked straight toward Alicia. Rachel turned away from Alicia and leaned in to whisper something in Mike's ear, her eyes gleaming with triumph, as though she'd just spotted the perfect excuse to deal with this problem. Though her words were hushed, Alicia caught fragments like disturbance, trespassing, and not on the schedule. Instantly, Rachel snapped back to her polished professionalism and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the lobby. "This isn't a public lounge, especially during work hours. We don't admit anyone without a properly confirmed appointment." Like a well-oiled machine, Mike closed the distance and stood directly in Alicia's path. His glare traveled from her head to her feet, not so much watchful as openly contemptuous. In a low, gravelly voice laden with entitlement, he said, "People like you shouldn't be wandering around here, understand? This is a workplace for those who actually belong, not somewhere to hang out." He paused, nodded toward Rachel, then added with chilling calm, "You should head back to the basement where your mother works. We keep tight security here. Don't want any trouble." Alicia gripped her folder, fighting to keep her hands from shaking under the weight of authority bearing down on her from both sides. Mike's guard uniform on one flank, Rachel's sharp smile on the other. Her back pressed against the cold marble reception counter, while behind her, the vast lobby thrummed with whispered glances. Some employees shook their heads in disapproval, others smirked. Yet not one person spoke up or offered support. She swallowed hard and met Mike's eyes without flinching, though shame flooded her chest. It was clear now, her presence here, her skin, her lineage, was never meant to be normal. It felt as though a single look, a stray gesture, even a different breath might be enough justification for them to wield their power and expel her from this space for the worthy. Rachel folded her arms and leaned into Mike, her tone honeyed but edged like a dagger. If Miss Monroe really did have an appointment, it must be some kind of mix-up. Best thing is to return to the basement with your mother, or just leave the building quietly. Tension coiled in the air, threatening to erupt if Alicia dared raise her voice. A few women passed by, lips curled in disdain as they whispered, "She's just in everyone's way." A man in a red tie brushed past and deliberately jostled Alicia's shoulder without so much as an apology. Alicia took a steadying breath, lifted her chin, and let her eyes reflect the sting of insult and the quiet fury within. Memories of her mother's years of silent endurance rose in her mind, Martha's uncomplaining resolve despite every indignity. Thinking of her, a surprising strength and fierce pride flickered in Alicia's heart, something no number of cruel taunts or disdainful glances could extinguish. But before Alicia could summon a retort or plea for help, another sequence of events snapped the moment's momentum. Hurried footsteps, the rustle of papers thrown down on the desk, and a new, authoritative voice echoing from the corridor, like a second wave poised to shatter every lingering prejudice in this place. The air in Bright Tech's main lobby felt suffocating under the simmering tension of thinly veiled jabs, condescending gestures, and the prying stares of Mike and Rachel. Alicia remained rooted in place, her back lightly pressed against the icy reception desk. She gripped her stack of documents, head bowed just enough, but her eyes held a steely resolve behind long lashes. In that instant, the entire world contracted into a cramped space where racism and classism clung thicker than the grime on the skyscraper windows her mother polished each night. Then, in a heartbeat, an unexpected chain of events shattered the stifling atmosphere as if an invisible hand had upended the power balance. From the hallway leading to the executive offices came the rapid staccato of footsteps across the marble. Not the soft click of heels from managers or analysts, but decisive, urgent strides driven by someone under immense pressure. At the front strode a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s, salt and pepper hair immaculately trimmed, a navy suit without a wrinkle, eyes cold and piercing. Douglas Blake, the formidable CEO of Bright Tech Innovations. His reputation extended far beyond tech circles, a ruthless leader who brooked no failure or mediocrity. To his staff, he was a blend of dread and admiration, a living symbol of iron discipline and emotionless efficiency. He carried a thick bundle of papers, clipped together haphazardly, edges dog-eared. A rare sight for a man so exacting. His jaw tightened, lips pressed into a thin line of barely contained fury. 2 senior assistants, a man and a woman, followed closely, pale and sweating despite the roaring air conditioning. In only a few strides, Douglas loomed over the reception desk, unconcealing his ire. He slammed the dossier onto the marble counter. The resounding thud echoed throughout the lobby. Staff, who'd been watching the unauthorized guest spectacle, jumped in their seats and retreated to their stations as if a storm had just struck. Douglas's voice thundered, low and lethal, like a war drum rallying troops. "Who here can solve this data crisis for me, huh? Where's your analytics team? All those MBA geniuses. Have they all thrown up their hands?" His steely gaze swept the room, stripping away every mask of those cowering beneath. It paused briefly on Alicia, as if he saw her vulnerable presence, but in his rage, social strata dissolved. Rachel's composure cracked. Her face tightened even as she struggled to maintain her polished veneer. She stammered, seeking to belittle Alicia. "Mr. Blake, I'm handling an outside situation. She's not staff and could cause a disturbance. I was about to have security escort her out." With a single glare, Douglas cut her off, dismissing her words as irrelevant. He cared nothing for outsiders, people of color, or janitors' children. He cared about one thing: fixing the data meltdown. He brandished the papers before them. "I don't care who fixes it, janitor, intern, or my dog. If it gets done, I want it now. We have a board meeting in 2 hours. Without results, nobody here walks away happy." Silence fell like a shroud. Those who'd mocked Alicia now exchanged anxious glances, some avoiding Douglas's eyes entirely. Brian Carter, the CFO, peered from the hallway corner, recoiling as if from an explosion. In that moment, bias yielded to a new, universal fear: being called out, given a task beyond one's abilities, or, worse, exposed as incompetent by the CEO himself. Alicia, meanwhile, stood statuesque, her mind racing from fear to confusion to a glimmer of hope. This might be her chance to prove her worth, yet any misstep could mean permanent exile. Mike, still guarding her path, turned to Douglas in half-meek, half-territorial tones. "Sir, I'll remove her from the lobby so as not to disturb." Rachel's eager expression begged for permission to banish Alicia, but Douglas silenced them both with a dismissive wave. Those moments stretched on, clocks on the wall, and passing footsteps seemed to pause, leaving only Douglas's icy stare scanning each face. Then he locked eyes with Alicia. The small black girl pressed against the wall and barked, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Do you know anything about data analysis?" The lobby froze, all gazes fixed on Alicia, awaiting an awkward confession or the dramatic ejection they'd been primed to enjoy. Alicia lifted her head, determination blazing in her eyes. She knew that failing to seize this moment would shatter both her dreams and her mother's. Her voice trembled but remained firm. "My name is Alicia Monroe. I have an interview for the data analyst position, but if there's an issue with the report, I can try to help." Her words rang clear through the tense hush. No one expected the janitor's daughter, the black outsider just dismissed, to volunteer in place of the company's experts. Some scoffed. "Who does she think she is? Standing on our data team's shoulders." Rachel ground her teeth. So delusional, completely embarrassing. Mike hissed a warning. "If you take this on, you're asking for trouble." But Douglas was different. His gaze softened from cold to intrigued. Intrigued not by her audacity as an outsider, but by her rare confidence. He neither sneered nor scowled, but stared at Alicia a moment longer, then unexpectedly handed her the dossier, voice steady. 5 minutes. If you identify the problem that the data team couldn't, I'll personally interview you. If not, you'll leave this building forever. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Rachel froze, Mike's eyebrows shot up, and curious staff gathered by the glass-walled meeting room, where Alicia now had exactly 5 minutes to make or break her fate. And just like that, the power balance in Bright Tech's grand lobby reversed. No more insults, no more blatant bias, no more petty cruelty. Everything was swept up in a real storm, the storm of opportunity, where the final verdict would be decided by intellect, not skin color, status, or favoritism. With fear, pressure, and humiliation still fresh in her mind, Alicia straightened and stepped toward the glass-walled meeting room. Her steps no longer trembled. They carried the weight of courage, a burning drive to prove herself, and the silent pride of a daughter long marginalized. She knew this test wasn't just for her. It carried her mother's hopes and the unvoiced dreams of countless unseen black workers lost within the city's glittering facade. Outside, Rachel and Mike, two embodiments of entrenched prejudice, still lurked. Rachel's eyes followed Alicia with cold resentment, thinking, "Let her try. When she fails, I'll be the first to show that people like her don't belong here." But history is often written in its most unexpected moments, and those in power don't always get the final say. The rising tide was ready to sweep away the old guard, ushering in a new battle, one waged by wit, grit, and unwavering self-belief. The air in Bright Tech's grand lobby, already thick with tension, grew even heavier with astonishment and skepticism. Whispers and sideways glances, from the hallway to the coffee bar, converged on Alicia Monroe, the small black girl standing before a sea of white faces in polished suits and glass walls, a world that had never been hers. Then, in that hush, Alicia's voice rang out clear and unwavering. "I want to try." Her words cut through the murmur like a bell tolling at market time, snapping every head toward her, only for the whispers to swell again a moment later, this time laced with mockery and blatant prejudice. An older man with salt and pepper hair, a longtime colleague of Alicia's mother, smirked as he leaned in to whisper, "Who does she think she is? A black girl, the janitor's daughter, daring to take on a job the entire analytics team wouldn't touch." In a corner, two young female employees, who'd never spoken to Alicia's mom beyond, "Ma'am, could you clean here, please?" snickered. "Let's see what that poor kid can do. At best, she knows how to scrub toilets. Data analysis, not so much." Mike Dalton stood frozen, disbelief etched on his face. He shook his head at Rachel, as if expecting her to reassure him that it'll all end soon, she'll be embarrassed. Rachel's brow furrowed, and her grip tightened on the countertop. For the first time that morning, the woman who ruled the reception desk felt something like genuine anxiety. Not fear that Alicia might succeed, but fear that success would shatter their carefully ordered world. Yet Alicia remained unmoved. She kept her palms from showing their sweat, hid her ragged breath beneath her borrowed blazer, and fixed her gaze on Douglas Blake's broad back and stern profile, the man who'd just granted her this extraordinary chance. Douglas said nothing further, studying her with an inscrutable mix of doubt and silent expectation. Without a word of comfort or condescension, he placed the thick dossier on the glass conference table and declared with finality, 5 minutes. If you solve it, I'll be the first to interview you. If not, this ends here." To Alicia, his words were both command and promise, the single lifeline in a sea of strangers and prejudice. Those 5 minutes weren't merely to crack a data set. They represented her history, her honor, and the future she and her mother had dreamed of. She squared her shoulders and walked toward the glass-walled meeting room. Each step banished a shred of fear, even as shaking heads, mocking laughter, and contemptuous stares clawed at her back. Inside the conference room, morning light poured through thick windows, illuminating the cold tabletop and its mountain of paperwork. Alicia sat down, her hands still trembling, eyes blazing with focus. She glanced at the wall clock, each second stretching like an eternity. Outside, curious onlookers pressed their faces to the glass, certain no black girl in worn clothes could alter the fate of a major corporation. Mike stood guard just beyond the glass, arms crossed, eyes sharp, ready to haul her out at the first sign of irregularity. Rachel hovered by her phone, shooting sly smiles whenever Alicia paused to write, as if savoring the moment before her inevitable fall. The lobby's buzz grew louder. Steve, a younger guard no less prejudiced, leaned in and whispered, "If she actually pulls this off, I'll volunteer to mop floors for Martha." Laughter rippled through the crowd like cracks in safety glass, thickening the tension. Alicia knew they'd gathered not to applaud, but to watch her fail. Every smirk and tilted head was a slap to her pride. Yet inside those four walls she chose silence, letting the numbers, not her background or skin color, deliver the verdict. Time ticked on. Each second stretched taut against everyone's nerves. Mike shifted impatiently. Rachel rose to adjust papers, furtively checking her watch. Some passers-by even raised phones, ready to capture the historic moment of her collapse. What none realized was that, in that very instant, Alicia Monroe, the janitor's daughter who refused to bow to injustice, was rewriting the narrative no one in Bright Tech's grand lobby dared to imagine. The air in Bright Tech's grand lobby, already thick with tension, grew almost suffocating as astonishment and doubt rippled through the crowd. Every whisper and sideways glance, from the hallway to the coffee bar, zeroed in on Alicia Monroe, the petite black girl standing before a sea of white faces in polished suits and glass walls, a world she'd only ever observed from outside, peering through the foggy windows her mother cleaned at night. But today she was at the center of suspicion, expectation, and a fragile spark of hope. On the far side of the thick glass, Douglas Blake stood with arms crossed, his deep-set eyes wrestling between trusting a stranger and maintaining the company's safe status quo. Around him, colleagues, security guards, even Rachel and Mike, all stared rigidly, firing invisible arrows of scrutiny at Alicia's every move. Some waited eagerly to mock her failure. Others were simply curious about this unusual rebellion. Yet none truly believed the poor black girl could succeed. Alicia sat down in the cold black leather chair. Before her lay a towering stack of documents, data tables, reports, forecasts, tangled footnotes, and dancing numbers. Vivid memories flooded her mind. Nights spent watching her mother quietly sweep the halls while Alicia studied behind the old reception desk, eyes stealing peeks through the office glass at analysts debating figures. She'd salvaged discarded reports, poring over equations, algorithms, and annotations, solving practice problems just to prove, to her mother and herself, that intellect knows no skin color. Now, all that experience came rushing back. Alicia's hands steadied. She flipped through pages at lightning speed, eyes scanning like lasers, spotting logical errors and mismatches the experts, either through oversight or haste, had missed. She honed in on the tiniest details, the very places her colleagues had skipped. Outside the conference room, Rachel Evans could no longer maintain her feigned calm. Every time Alicia paused to think or furrowed her brow, Rachel glanced at her watch and smirked. certain of Alicia's imminent failure. Mike planted himself by the glass door like a boulder, eyes never leaving Alicia, ready to shove her out at the first sign of irregularity. Meanwhile, Douglas watched Alicia's every motion. Whenever she looked up, their eyes met, a silent pact forming. In this room, at this moment, only true ability would decide the outcome. 3 minutes in, the lobby's murmurs grew louder as onlookers clustered at the glass. "Do you think she'll actually find something? Look how awkward she sits." What was Douglas thinking? Handing the company's fate to a nobody, the janitor's daughter? Rachel whispered anxiously to Mike, her arrogance slipping away. "Time's almost up. This is a joke. Her blind confidence is going to kill her." Mike nodded, yet he couldn't deny a spark of curiosity. Why did Alicia's eyes shine with such focus, such rare confidence in a place determined to reject her? At the 4th minute, tension spiked. Numbers began to snap into a clear pattern. Alicia spotted an overlooked line in Q2 data, a raw material contract that had expired and gone unupdated in the price forecast model, throwing the whole dataset off. Her heart pounded. She underlined the critical entry, flipped back to the appendix to compare last year's contracts, and, relying on mental math honed from helping her mother balance the family's expenses, she quickly adjusted the model's formula. No computer, no software, just her mind and real-world problem-solving. At 4.5 minutes, Alicia looked up. She saw Douglas watching, intrigued. Rachel's lips curled in anticipation of her collapse. Mike kept glancing anxiously at his watch. Outside, employees pressed their faces to the glass, waiting for the janitor's daughter to finally buckle. But just as everyone braced for her defeat, Alicia calmly stood, clutching her annotated dossier. She tapped the glass tabletop once, an echoing signal marking the end of a battle only she believed she could win. The glass door slid open. Alicia stepped out, her gaze no longer fearful but shining with self-belief. She held the dossier toward Douglas and spoke with composed strength. "Here is the root cause of the discrepancies. The Q2 raw material contract expired and wasn't updated in the model, skewing every subsequent figure. By adjusting the model with the new contract terms, all the numbers realign." Douglas took the papers, flicked to the marked pages, and for the first time in ages, a flicker of genuine excitement lit his eyes, an emotion buried beneath the rigid rationality of countless disappointments. He signaled an assistant to verify. A few tense minutes later, the screen confirmed it. Every figure matched perfectly. Silence flooded the lobby. Rachel froze, knuckles white. Mike stepped back. His earlier menace gone. The crowd outside fell mute, unable to believe that the janitor's daughter, a black girl in worn clothes, outperformed both the analytics team and senior management. Douglas studied Alicia long and hard, his expression softening with admiration and respect, emotions rare for a CEO hardened by business battles. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried profound esteem. "What is your name?" Alicia answered firmly. "Alicia Monroe." Behind her, Rachel sagged, utterly drained of strength. Mike lowered his eyes, unable to meet Alicia's gaze. Douglas then turned to the entire lobby, his look saying plainly, "Sometimes the most extraordinary talent emerges from the least expected places." As Alicia walked away from the glass-walled meeting room, her steps were steadier than ever. The bias, the stares, the mocking laughter, all had become the springboard for her irreversible transformation. In that moment, she not only upheld her own dignity, but compelled an entire power structure to pause and rethink. about the true worth of a person. The moment Alicia Monroe calmly stepped out of the glass-walled meeting room, the bustle outside froze. The crowd that had been laughing and jeering fell utterly silent. Every eye in that marble-floored lobby was fixed on her. The small black girl they dismissed as a speck of dust on Bright Tech's polished stone. Yet now, they were the ones stunned to witness something extraordinary unfolding before them. In her hands, she held only a creased packet of papers, some with hastily scribbled notes and numbers underlined in a dull pencil. There was no computer, no high-tech tool, no backstage support from anyone in the company. Just a keen memory, razor-sharp analysis, and the guts honed by years of growing up alongside her mother in those cramped basement corridors. Douglas Blake stood before her, arms folded, his previously steely gaze softened by genuine respect. He didn't rush to praise or draw conclusions. Instead, he flipped through Alicia's marked pages, checking each calculation and footnote with meticulous care. His assistant tapped away on a tablet, entering the numbers and matching them on screen, an atmosphere so tense you could almost hear it crack. Curious employees pressed their faces to the glass. Rachel and Mike forced calm masks, though beneath their composure lay churning anxiety, anger, and a humiliating sting of shame. Alicia stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back, chin lifted. There was none of the trembling fear of the girl who had just crossed the threshold of prejudice, only fierce pride and unshakable conviction in her own worth. She didn't glance at Rachel, nor did she spare Mike a second look. She waited only for the final verdict from the one person still empowered to determine her fate, Douglas Blake. Then, in the hush broken only by soft keystrokes and heavy breaths of denial, Douglas's assistant looked up, voice catching with surprise. "Sir, the calculations are all correct. The results match the benchmark data perfectly. There's no discrepancy." Douglas closed his eyes for a moment, as if releasing the enormous burden that had weighed on him for days. He turned to Alicia, and for the first time his eyes held not just respect but genuine admiration. "You've just saved our entire board meeting from failure. Do you realize that?" His words rippled through the lobby like a tide. Those who had nodded in smug dismissal now faced a dazzling truth. Real value doesn't reside in a college diploma. It isn't determined by skin color, pedigree, or the backroom handshakes of privilege. Rachel Evans, who had long believed she controlled every flow in that lobby, stood with her face flushed and knuckles white against the desk. In her eyes, Alicia was no longer a mere speck to be swept away, but a whirlwind upheaving their familiar order. She stammered an excuse. Maybe it was just luck. Perhaps our experts were tired and overlooked something. How could someone without credentials? Douglas cut her off with a steely glance. "Here, we judge results, not luck or background. She spotted what a six-figure MBA team missed. That's what matters." Rachel fell silent, head bowed, suffocated by her own pettiness and the sharp sting of embarrassment. But beneath her shame lingered a dark ember of resentment, anger that her small authority had been shaken by someone she once deemed unworthy of notice. Mike fared no better, his face twisted with helpless fury. He stepped back, unable to meet Alicia's gaze, but his mind still clung to one hard belief. Those born in the basement belong there. Today's reality, however, struck that belief like a slap, leaving him rattled and fearful for his own little realm of power. Outside, the jeering crowd now exchanged looks of awe, envy, and cautious respect. Some flushed with shame, Others recoiled at the presence of this unpredictable wild card. For Alicia's triumph meant nothing here would ever be unchanged. After a solemn pause, Douglas stepped forward and extended his hand. "Alicia Monroe, I want you to present these findings to our entire board of directors. They need to know the truth, and to know that this company survives because of individuals brave enough to break its limits, like you." In that moment, the entire lobby fell into a deeper hush, broken only by the soft whoosh of the automatic doors. Alicia clasped Douglas's hand, feeling its firm assurance, and drawing from it a powerful surge of confidence. If you refuse to stop striving, no one, even the most powerful, can keep you from standing tall on intellect and dignity. She turned once more toward Rachel and Mike, saying nothing. No retaliation, no gloating. Her silence was reply enough. At that moment, any words of defense or denial would have been mere whispers drowned by the triumph of justice, courage, and unbroken self-belief. From this moment on, Alicia Monroe was no longer a shadow in the building's basement, no longer the janitor's daughter. She had shattered the greatest barriers of all, prejudice and indifference, and her journey, the journey of true intellect rising from obscurity, had officially begun, promising both formidable challenges and boundless hope ahead. The CEO's assistant's confirmation rang out in the hushed lobby like a thunderclap on a clear day. Alicia stood there, her hands still trembling from the tension, yet her face shone with a rare calmness. At that moment, Douglas Blake's gaze, so recently cold and detached, shifted through surprise, then respect, and finally settled on unshakable resolve. Without hesitation, and without so much as a nod to human resources, he declared, with the authority of a general on the battlefield, "Cancel all remaining interviews for today. Miss Monroe, come with me." His words dropped into the lobby like a command from on high, freezing everyone in place. Rachel Evans, no longer able to mask her panic, stood statue-still behind the reception desk. For so long she'd believed herself the gatekeeper of this floor. Now she was utterly powerless, her smug smile extinguished. Mike Dalton, ever eager to judge and enforce, hung his head, his broad shoulders shrinking inward. The rigid social order he'd taken for granted was crumbling around him. He had no excuses left, only bitterness, shame, and deep down, a trembling fear of the new world unfolding before his eyes. An awed silence held sway across the lobby. The mocking whispers had been replaced by murmurs of disbelief, admiration, and even envy. A few who jeered at Alicia now turned away, unable to meet her gaze, as though they feared seeing their own weakness reflected in her triumph. Douglas strode purposefully through the stunned crowd, not looking back. Alicia followed, her every step weighed with astonishment and pride, and, yes, a flicker of nerves, as she realized she'd just crossed a threshold she and her mother had only ever dared to dream of. They walked the gleaming corridor up to the topmost floor, to the reinforced glass doors guarding the executive boardroom, the very place Alicia had only glimpsed from hurried daylight shafts as she accompanied her mother after night shifts. She never imagined she would enter this space not as the janitor's daughter, but as the person who had just saved the company from a major crisis. The boardroom doors swung open to reveal a ring of power. Executives accustomed to million-dollar decisions, their eyes cool and their attire impeccable. Douglas led Alicia to the front with steady purpose. "This is Alicia Monroe, the person who solved the crisis our entire expert team overlooked. I'd like her to present these findings directly to the board. Leave prejudice at the door. Here, we deal only in truth." The initial hush in the room gave way to a tense hum of calculation. Some directors frowned, others exchanged uneasy glances, all registering shock to see a casually dressed black girl standing beside their legendary CEO. In those glances, Alicia sensed echoes of Rachel's and Mike's old contempt, but also a trace of discomfort. They no longer dared laugh. Instead, they silently challenged her with their unspoken doubts. Douglas handed Alicia the dossier and gestured for her to begin. She stood before the digital display, hands still slightly shaking, but as she walked through each calculation and logical step, her eyes glittered with pride, and her voice rang out clear and strong. I discovered that a raw material contract expired in Q2 and was never updated in the forecasting model. This single omission skewed every subsequent data point. By cross-referencing the appendices and adjusting the input formula to reflect the renewed contract terms, all discrepancies vanish. Here's the reconciliation. She presented fluently, fielding the occasional probing question from veteran board members determined not to let an outsider steal their thunder. Each time, Alicia's deep knowledge, self-taught analytical skills, and unwavering composure shone through, never once faltering. Outside the boardroom, Rachel curled up behind the reception counter, furious and envious. She furtively texted close colleagues, "It's just beginner's luck. She'll trip up soon enough." Mike lingered in the hallway, arms crossed, his expression a perplexing mix of anger and awe. The very idea that someone from the basement could outshine him struck fear deep in his core. Fear that tomorrow it might be his turn to be outpaced and sidelined. Inside, the room fell silent after Alicia's presentation. The directors conferred in low tones, some arching brows in surprise, others exchanging awkward apologies. A few of the older members scrutinized her not for her credentials but for her courage and transparency, qualities they'd long since lost to polished corporate performances. Douglas stood at her side, pride softening the lines of his face. He affirmed, "We've just witnessed someone with no formal credentials or insider status deliver what our highly paid experts missed. I believe in what Ms. Monroe has shown us, and I believe this is the future bright tech must embrace. A future unshackled from prejudice and complacent thinking." For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then, tentative applause broke out, first hesitant, then gathering strength. It wasn't just for Alicia. It was a recognition that a new era had arrived, one where true merit, courage, and decisiveness reigned supreme. Alicia felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, yet her final glance drifted to the glass walls where Rachel, Mike, and others who doubted her still lingered. She knew old prejudices wouldn't vanish overnight, but she also knew that from this moment on, she had shattered the greatest barrier of all. One's worth isn't defined by where we come from, but by the courage to stand up and do what's right, even when the whole world turns away. And so, atop Bright Tech's highest floor that day, the story of Alicia Monroe, the janitor's daughter who demolished entrenched bias with intellect and resolve, moved into its brightest new chapter. The air in the boardroom still hummed with the echo of approval when Douglas Blake nodded for Alicia to follow him into his private office, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, reserved only for the most powerful. Every step Alicia took rang out on the plush, carpeted corridor, past rows of walnut cabinetry and towering potted plants, an opulent world utterly unlike the cramped basement halls she and her mother knew. The CEO's office door closed behind them, shutting out the noise, the judgments, the prejudice. Douglas settled into the massive leather chair behind his desk and gestured for Alicia to sit opposite him. His gaze was no longer frosty, but neither was it warm. Rather, it held the measured scrutiny of a man accustomed to sizing people up beyond a single victory. Silence reigned, broken only by the steady tick of an antique clock on the bookshelf. Douglas steepled his fingers and leaned forward, his voice low and razor-sharp. "Ms. Monroe, I want to know more about you, your background, your education, your experience. I don't tolerate ambiguity. I need to know who I'm placing my trust in." Alicia met his eyes, took a steadying breath, and replied in clear, unflinching tones. "I'm Alicia Monroe, daughter of Martha Monroe, who has cleaned this building for nearly 30 years. I hold no prestigious degrees. Everything I know about data and auditing, I taught myself, by digging through tossed-out reports, by listening to conversations while working night shifts with my mom, through observation, and a fierce desire to prove I'm more than the janitor's daughter." Douglas did not interrupt. His gaze sharpened, yet glimmered with surprise and interest. He enunciated each word. "No formal training? No internships? No classes in data analysis? All by observation alone?" Alicia nodded, pride gleaming in her eyes. "Yes, sir. I learned from what others considered trash. I practiced reconciliation and logical analysis on old charts, on scraps of paper, even on napkins in the basement cafeteria. It was perseverance, self-respect, and a refusal to accept limits on who can excel." Douglas paused, wrestling with a complex mix of doubt and admiration. In his world, business success had always revolved around credentials from top institutions. Alicia, this young woman who had done the impossible, was an anomaly nobody had prepared for. He swiveled slightly to gaze out at the flowing traffic below before looking back. "Do you know what I'm weighing, Ms. Monroe? At Bright Tech, I've met many talented people, but few who dared to challenge their own biases, and those of others. You've just shattered a major barrier. Yet, to transform this entire system, you'll face even greater obstacles: suspicion, envy, and the covert sabotage of those who can't accept difference." Alicia absorbed his words, feeling their weight. She understood that at Bright Tech, power stood on invisible walls of pedigree, connections, and titles. Walls she was about to scale. Every glance, every whisper from this moment on could become a weapon. Douglas leaned in, eyes intense. "Are you afraid, Miss Monroe? Afraid of isolation, backlash, perhaps even retaliation for standing up and doing what no one else would?" Alicia didn't hesitate. "I used to be afraid, but not anymore. I know I won't please everyone, but I also know that if I don't bow my head, my mother will be proud. And I refuse to let anyone, no matter how powerful, define my worth or my future." A rare smile flickered across Douglas's face, part challenge, part approval. He tapped a pen on the desk and spoke firmly. "I want you to lead our new company-wide data audit project. Not as a member, but as team lead, responsible for finding errors, implementing corrections, and ensuring complete transparency. I need fresh eyes and an unbreakable spirit here." His words fell like a stone into still water. Alicia paused, feeling a surge of disbelief and possibility. 5 minutes of courage in the lobby, powered by nothing but her mind and grit, had earned her this. "Thank you, sir, but I've never led a project of this scale. I'll have a lot to learn." Douglas's gaze softened. "I don't need perfection. I need courage, fresh perspective, and the will to defy prejudice. Today, you proved all of that. As for anyone too narrow-minded to learn from you, I'll handle them myself." At that moment, just outside the office door, Rachel Evans peered through the crack, her heart racing. She hissed to Mike, "This can't stand. If she becomes team lead, soon there'll be more of her kind on the board. What happens to our old order?" Mike clenched his fists, face flushed. "Don't worry, Miss Evans. Everyone has a weakness. She'll slip up eventually. We just wait." But as Alicia stepped out of Douglas's office, the weight of a new and perilous future on her shoulders, she knew the real battle was only beginning. And it would not be her battle alone, but the dawn of a generation long overlooked, ready to step from the shadows, confront injustice and rewrite their own stories. The moment Alicia Monroe stepped out of the CEO's office, her steps were slow and deliberate, her emotions a heady mix of exhilaration and overwhelm, an experience only someone who stood on the threshold between invisibility and recognition can truly understand. Her first day as Bright-Tech's new data audit team lead had officially begun. But Alicia knew this wasn't the finish line. It was just the starting point for far greater challenges ahead. That morning, sunlight poured through the large windows on the 18th floor, casting a cool, almost harsh light across the boardroom. It highlighted the stern, confident faces of the experts seated around the long table. Alicia paused for a moment at the polished wooden door, took a deep breath, and forced a small smile to steady the anxiety swelling in her chest. As she entered, the room's atmosphere shifted. There were no warm greetings, only a frosty silence and scrutinizing stares. They took in the slightly rumpled borrowed blazer, the firm grip on her folder, and, most pointedly, her skin tone, which stood out against the pristine attire of the white professionals around her. At the head of the table sat Brian Carter, the long-serving CFO, his square jaw and sharp eyes betraying his irritation. Beside him was Jessica Collins, a seasoned data specialist with her blonde hair pulled back and her laptop open like a shield. Nearby sat Luke Sanders, a young but ambitious junior executive, arms crossed and smirking. And in the corner, Tommy Green, the very person whose error Alicia had exposed earlier. Head down, flipping through his own report, a mixture of shame and resentment on his face. Alicia could feel the distrust filling the air. Brian surveyed her coolly, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed contempt. Jessica sat upright, tapping her fingers on the table, her blue eyes flicking toward Alicia as if to confirm she really was leading a team of seasoned experts. Luke's smirk spoke of doubt, his posture daring her to prove herself. And all around, Alicia's promotion felt like a sharp crack in the unspoken hierarchy. White men in charge, credentialed voices honored, and insider connections above all. Brian cleared his throat and began the meeting in a calm but cutting tone. "I thought this was our internal review. Where is our new project lead?" Alicia met his gaze with a polite smile. "That would be me. I was directly appointed by CEO Douglas Blake." A ripple of surprise, and then murmurs, swept the room. Jessica's voice held a mocking edge. "Have you ever done audit work before? Any formal data certification?" Her question was both a test and a veiled attack. Luke chimed in with a sneer. "Surely you're self-taught?" Tommy said nothing, merely shrugged, avoiding her eyes but unable to hide the awkwardness of having his mistake laid bare to the whole company. Alicia knew those questions weren't meant to learn about her. They were meant to put her in her place, to remind her she was still an outsider, an interloper in their world. She answered steadily, openly acknowledging her background. "I've never had formal audit training. I learned from real-world reports discarded as trash, through observation and analysis, and by studying the very errors we often overlook." Jessica's thin smile turned sharper. "How interesting. I'm sure you'll learn a lot here. This team includes people with 10 years of experience, veterans from major banks, and leaders of multi-million-dollar projects." Brian tapped his pen impatiently. "Enough. Let's get started. Time is money. I want concrete results, not motivational fluff. Alicia opened her laptop and projected the freshly audited data onto the screen. She dove straight into the issues, refusing to waste time on pleasantries. She clearly explained the logical errors she'd found and outlined procedures to prevent future discrepancies. At first, her colleagues answered curtly, but as she drilled down into the details, their attention sharpened. It was real, practical insight, not abstract theory. Yet the air remained thick with doubt, like a heavy fog. Jessica interjected with probing follow-ups. Luke challenged her fiercely. Brian sat quietly, jotting notes as if searching for flaws in her logic. Tommy stayed silent but guarded, his eyes still flicking with bitterness at the outsider exposing his mistake. The meeting felt like a silent duel. On one side, long-held expertise, status, and pride. On the other, Alicia's intellect, courage, and willingness to break old conventions. In that moment, Alicia realized that to earn their respect here, she'd have to prove herself again and again, day after day, hour after hour. And perhaps her toughest battle wouldn't be with numbers, but with the biases, wounded egos, and simmering envy of those around her. She inhaled deeply, recalling her mother's words. Don't wait for someone to give you a chance. Become someone they can't ignore. With that resolve burning inside her, Alicia quietly readied herself for the longer, fiercer fight. A journey in which every small victory would be earned with sweat, pride, and unwavering persistence. The tension in the boardroom was still thick with wariness and suspicion, but Alicia knew she couldn't start anything new by hiding or staying silent. She glanced around and met the curious, doubtful, and, in some cases, openly hostile, stares of outsiders in the room. Determined to break the ice with honesty and directness, she stood, lifted her chin, and though her shoulders quivered just a bit, her eyes shone with resolve. In a calm but firm voice that cut through the cold hush, she said, I know I'm not like you. I know my background, my skin color, even the fact that I don't come from a prestigious university makes me hard to accept. But I'm not here to take anyone's place. I'm here because I see the gaps we sometimes miss, because we're rushed or because we're biased. Let me prove it by what I do, not by my resume or my skin. For a moment, the room fell utterly silent. Brian Carter looked up, impassive, neither smiling nor frowning, but thoughtful. Jessica Collins cracked a half smile, then bit her lip, surprised by the fearless openness. Luke Sanders smirked, partly mocking, but his eyes flickered with something like respect, as if he'd just spotted a real challenger. Tommy Green, whose error Alicia had pointed out, stayed silent, his expression stiff but betraying a flicker of unease, that first crack in a once rock-solid ego. After several heartbeats, Brian spoke, his tone measured and genuinely curious this time, no trace of contempt. If you really see these gaps, what would you tackle first? Alicia answered without hesitation. I'd begin by auditing every single step in our data pipeline, from those tiny errors everyone thinks are inconsequential, to the structural blind spots in our audit system that have long gone unexamined. I'll welcome every objection, even if it's directed at me, and I'll push back when necessary. I won't let us accept mistakes just because everyone agrees on them. Jessica piped up, and what if we refuse to listen? Alicia met her gaze and offered a genuine smile. I won't demand your attention because of my title, and not because I'm the chosen one. I only ask this. If I point out an error you've missed, have the courage to face it, just as I faced all those doubtful looks today. A subtle ripple passed through the room. Alicia's courage and composure didn't instantly win their admiration, but it forced them to pause and reflect. Brian nodded ever so slightly. Jessica fell silent. Luke's smirk faded as he looked away, unsettled. The meeting continued. Alicia didn't back down when challenged or cornered. She laid out her cross-check plan in detail, assigned clear responsibilities, and insisted that every team member had the right, even the duty, to question one another, including her. That approach drew reluctant participation, a challenge wrapped in an invitation to collaborate as equals, with no one exempt from accountability. After nearly an hour of heated debate, the atmosphere began to shift. Initial harsh critiques gave way to substantive questions about methodology and process. Some people even nodded in agreement. Others suggested small improvements. These were small gestures, but in a culture where trust had once been a rare privilege, they marked significant progress. Only when the meeting broke up did Tommy Green linger. He approached Alicia, his face softened by a hint of gratitude and self-respect. "You caught the mistake I couldn't see. In this field, everyone's terrified of being exposed. I have to admit, that's made me take a hard look at myself. Thank you for not staying silent." Alicia returned his handshake with a warm smile. "None of us is perfect, Tommy. What matters is that we're brave enough to face our mistakes and learn from them, rather than hide them." Tommy nodded, gripping her hand a bit more firmly, a small sign that trust was beginning to take root in this once frigid room. Outside, Jessica Collins passed Rachel Evans, the formerly arrogant receptionist, and shook her head. "She's not someone you can knock down easily." Rachel frowned, a nameless frustration stirring inside her, but for the first time, it was mingled with genuine worry. Something about Alicia's steady light was beyond her control. And as Alicia walked back down the hall, she no longer felt like a tiny speck among the powerful. She understood that the real battle lay ahead, and those entrenched prejudices wouldn't vanish after just one meeting. But she also knew this. Every act of courage, every refusal to bow down, was a giant leap toward proving her worth. Not by title or background, but by her own ability and character. After that first tense, contentious meeting, the atmosphere in Bright Tech's data room gradually eased. But what mattered most wasn't the detailed plan or the assignment chart Alicia had just presented. It was the way she steered the ship, quietly and calmly, unlike any team lead they'd ever known. Alicia didn't bark orders or wield her new title like a cudgel. She didn't distance herself behind rank or authority. Instead, she stayed in the small room off the main hall, inviting conversation. She listened, patiently, to every comment, even the timid, skeptical, or snide ones. With Brian Carter, she asked about the major audits he'd led and genuinely solicited his advice on improving the new process. To Jessica Collins, she said, "I know my data digitizing skills need work. I'd really appreciate your guidance on the new system." That request wasn't groveling. It was honest vulnerability, a willingness to expose her weaknesses to her teammates and use their feedback to improve. By doing so, she dismantled the invisible wall between veterans and newcomers, between insiders and outsiders. Luke Sanders, known for his sarcastic asides, was surprised when Alicia addressed him directly. "You raised questions about inventory figures earlier. If you were in charge, how would you secure the input data?" He arched an eyebrow, half sneer, half challenge. But when Alicia truly listened, took notes seriously, and engaged him in dialogue, he couldn't just dismiss her. He found himself contributing ideas that she then wove into the new system's design. During the group work, Alicia never hesitated to admit mistakes. When someone offered a better suggestion, she openly pivoted, saying, "Thanks, Brian, I missed that. Let's try your approach." Her readiness to embrace criticism slowly diffused the defensive expert mindset. The team began to see her not as the CEO's favorite or an outsider, but as a real colleague, someone committed to results and the group's collective growth. After the session ended and everyone had mostly left, Tommy Green, the once silent, cold critic, approached Alicia. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes were warmer than before. In a straightforward tone, he said, "No one outside our field has ever pointed out a basic error of mine, and no one's ever done it without embarrassing me. Thank you for sparing my dignity." Alicia squeezed his hand and smiled gently. "None of us are perfect, Tommy. If you don't have the courage to face your mistakes, I can't learn anything new either." That handshake, seemingly small, sent an unspoken signal through the group. Their leader was here not to preach superiority, but to collaborate and empower everyone to improve. From that day on, the audit room's vibe changed bit by bit. Brian, still reserved, began sharing reference materials with Alicia. Jessica occasionally opened her laptop to show Alicia advanced analysis techniques. Luke, though still probing, shifted to asking substantive challenges rather than trying to trip her up. Tommy eagerly pitched small ideas, and when they were adopted, his expression lit up as never before. Meanwhile, down the hallway, not everyone welcomed this shift. Rachel Evans watched silently, ever vigilant, waiting for the day Alicia will fail. Mike whispered to the other guards about affirmative favoritism, hoping to find allies in a system that was changing beneath their feet. Amid that charged atmosphere, Alicia felt the weight of her role more keenly than ever. She knew that to turn skeptics into true teammates, she had to be persistent, upholding integrity, listening with empathy, and standing firm on principles. She spent her evenings studying, meticulously noting her own weaknesses, and continually seeking colleagues' mentorship, showing that her progress came from effort, not innate talent. Gradually, the team stopped viewing Alicia with suspicion. Their initial respect, sparked by her single success, grew into genuine trust after days of working side by side. They no longer served a new team lead. They pursued a shared goal with her: to make Bright Tech's data system a symbol of transparency, efficiency, and resilience against manipulation, whether by the powerful or by long-entrenched experts. Even still in the shadows, a few jealous glances lingered, quiet, scheming from people like Rachel and Mike, and even some senior managers reluctant to relinquish their old privileges. But Alicia understood. Not every prejudice dissolves overnight, but every teammate I win over is another fortress of the past that's fallen. And so began her real journey, transforming doubters into allies. A journey of growth, of relentless change, and of a new generation daring to speak honestly, act boldly, and live true to their worth. The air in the data room still carried the echo of heated debates and reconciliations, but for Alicia, she'd never faced a test this critical. 2 days after turning doubters into teammates, she got a terse message from Douglas Blake. "Prepare everything for the board presentation. I want you to present all of your findings and new initiatives. Don't let anyone underestimate the real value here." Those words felt like both a summons and a verdict. That evening, Alicia lingered late in the office. Rows of data and freshly drafted audit diagrams scrolled before her eyes as she meticulously adjusted each slide. But her anxiety wasn't just about numbers. It was about standing in front of a room full of powerful figures, financial heavyweights whose cool stares and ingrained skepticism would be her true audience. On the appointed day, Alicia entered the boardroom atop the building. Massive leather chairs ringed a gleaming oval table, under warm overhead lights, illuminating the sharp, authoritative faces of the leadership team, people accustomed to deciding others' fates with a single nod or shake of the head. At the head of the table sat Douglas Blake, his expression composed but stern, silently conveying, "Today, you must prove what they've never dared to believe." Feeling the dual weight of bias and expectation on her shoulders, Alicia clicked to her first slide and steadily addressed the room. The faces in front of her, mostly wealthy white men, tracked her every move, from adjusting the lapel mic to advancing her first bullet point. She refused to let her fears show. Confidently, she outlined her pivotal discovery. Our company's report overlooked a major supply chain fluctuation, which skewed all downstream data and exposed us to potential losses in the tens of millions. I've traced the root error and am proposing a real-time audit workflow to catch and correct these issues at the earliest stage. Using side-by-side comparisons and clear visuals, she demonstrated how the old process fell short and how her solution closed the gap. Her team, once skeptical, now sat ready to support her, fielding questions from the board and proving the unity she had fostered. But it wasn't just technical scrutiny. One board member, Mr. Walton, chairman of a major investment fund, known for his incisiveness, arched an eyebrow and asked coldly, "Your presentation is compelling, but tell us, what makes someone without a prestigious education confident enough to stand here, instead of the highly paid experts we employ?" All eyes shifted to her. The room felt frozen. Not because they sought another technical explanation, but because they were challenging her very right to be there. It was an unspoken test of legitimacy. A young black woman, humble origins, stepping into a seat normally reserved for insiders. Alicia inhaled, meeting every powerful gaze head-on. She didn't flinch or hedge. With quiet pride, she replied, "I was raised in this very building. My mother, Martha Monroe, has cleaned these halls for 28 years. I may not have attended an Ivy League, but I learned from every footstep, every midnight sweep. I studied the work of the experts here, read the discarded reports they no longer needed. I taught myself everything else with the pride, persistence, and belief that intelligence has no color or pedigree." A few brows knitted in discomfort, but here and there a slight nod. At the end of the table, Douglas allowed a subtle flourish of pride to cross his face. Alicia pressed on. "I'm not here to replace anyone or demand special treatment. I'm here to show that this company grows stronger on genuine value, transparency, intellect, and collaboration, regardless of background or status." A hush fell. Mr. Walton leaned forward, his tone still cool but less cutting. "If this model fails, who will be held responsible?" She answered without hesitation, "I will. But I believe, and I trust this team, that we will not fail." Her words were more than personal commitment. They were a direct challenge to the long-standing, unseen biases of the system. In the back row, Rachel Evans watched with seething anger and growing unease. Mike, normally brash, leaned toward a colleague, but for once didn't dare scoff. When Alicia finished, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then Mr. Walton let out a low chuckle and nodded. "Very well. This company does need fresh air. Let's see how it plays out in practice." A cautious round of applause began, tentative at first, then growing in strength. Douglas Blake stood and shook Alicia's hand in full view of the board. It was more than a personal gesture. It was an official declaration. A new generation, a new set of values, had finally been recognized at the heart of what had once been their forbidden territory. In that moment, though she knew many challenges still lay ahead, Alicia understood one undeniable truth. She had stepped out of her mother's shadow and out from under prejudice to stand proudly in the light, propelled by her own ability and self-respect. The last rounds of applause died away, but the boardroom still buzzed with the afterglow of Alicia's stellar presentation and her bold commitment. Douglas Blake's gaze had shifted entirely. He rose from the head of the table, his voice calm yet more resonant than ever before. In my career, I've reviewed thousands of impressive diplomas and hired countless experts from Ivy League schools, Harvard, Stanford, you name it. But today, more clearly than ever, I see that it's true talent, tenacity, and courage that determine a team's success, not a glossy resume or a storied pedigree. He swept his eyes across the board members, his tone weighty. I propose we establish a new data audit division to safeguard transparency and sustainable growth at Bright Tech. And there is no one more deserving to lead it than Alicia Monroe, the team lead who just saved this company from a multi-million-dollar disaster. The room stilled. At first, hesitation flickered across the directors' faces, surprise, wariness, even skepticism. These were men accustomed to wielding power, many of whom had never had to listen to anyone beyond their inner circle. Yet here they were, confronted with a black woman from the humblest background, a janitor's daughter who once moved unseen through these halls, now standing at the center of their authority. Alicia's skill, resolve, and composure forced them to re-examine their long-held criteria for leadership. Mr. Walton, the coldest and most inscrutable investment fund chairman in the room, nodded slowly, a decisive gesture that rippled through the group. One by one, the other members voiced their support, some tentatively, others reluctantly, but the consensus was real. The resolution was recorded. Alicia Monroe would officially become Bright Tech's first-ever data audit director, a leader whose roots lay in the lowest rungs of the workforce but who had ascended to the summit of intellectual authority. Douglas stepped forward and shook Alicia's hand before the entire board, his voice brimming with pride and emotion. "You've given me, and all of us here, a powerful lesson. A company's true strength lies in its willingness to embrace new talent, to tear down barriers, and to push further." Alicia returned his handshake with a determined smile. In her bright eyes, she saw her mother's face, Martha Monroe, more vividly than ever. She recalled every midnight her mother had labored, pushing that cleaning cart across the cold floors, always advising, "Hold your head high and keep your heart kind. Your worth won't always be seen at first glance, but you must believe in it first." Word of the decision swept through Bright Tech like a shockwave. Some couldn't believe it, others felt tears of pride. A few glared with silent envy, while many more openly admired her. Even longtime antagonists, Rachel Evans and Mike Dalton, couldn't deny, however bitterly, that the old order they had fought so fiercely to maintain was now shaken. Rachel sat behind the reception desk, lips pressed tight, contemplating what true worth really meant. Mike passed Alicia in the hallway, not with his usual sneer but with a grudging, downward glance, both acknowledgement and fear of the new era dawning. Meanwhile, Alicia's audit team celebrated. Tommy Green clasped her hand in front of everyone. "If you hadn't called me out, I'd never have realized how badly I was mistaken about my own ability. Thank you for saving my dignity." Brian Carter shared his decades of insight unprompted. Jessica Collins sent her first-ever email, "Thanks to our new director for inspiring me to learn more." Luke Sanders gleefully invited the whole team for coffee, toasting to the fact that Alicia was not just a boss, but a true leader. That evening on the ground floor, Martha Monroe stood at the window, gazing up at the Bright Tech logo glowing overhead. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from fatigue, but from pride. This quiet woman, who had never sought the spotlight, had witnessed her daughter become the emblem of a new chapter, one defined by belief, determination, and boundless worth. As Alicia descended the grand lobby, passing colleagues who once turned away or whispered behind her back, she felt no bitterness and had no need for retribution. She understood that her greatest victory wasn't defeating her doubters. It was showing them who they could become when they dared to look beyond prejudice. And amid the cheers of her team, Douglas's proud handshake, and her mother's silent shining gaze, Alicia Monroe walked out of that boardroom, lighter, freer, and brimming with hope that, at last, true value would be recognized on its own merits. That morning, when Alicia Monroe took office as Bright Tech's Data Audit Director, the city shone with its usual sunlight. But for Alicia, it was the first time she could hold her head high as she walked through the magnificent lobby that had once been the domain of scornful looks, contemptuous stares, and whispered judgments she and her mother had endured for so many years. Beside her was Martha Monroe, her silver-haired mother in a familiar, well-worn coat, her back bowed from years of silently cleaning these halls through long nights. The usual weariness on her face was replaced today by pride, her eyes following Alicia with both astonishment and wonder at a world of power that had once seemed so distant. As they passed through the great revolving doors, Mike, the guard who once coldly blocked Alicia because of her skin and background, bowed his head in respect and quietly held the door open. His gaze was no longer a barrier but a silent acknowledgement, perhaps even regret. Each nod marked another note in the triumphant symphony of their fate, where what once crushed them now propelled them forward. Inside the lobby, Rachel Evans, the once arrogant receptionist who had voiced the building's unspoken prejudices, rose and averted her eyes. Then, in a hushed voice just loud enough for Alicia to hear, she muttered an apology. I'm sorry for what I said before." Alicia paused for a moment, then replied with gentle understanding. "The past can't be changed, but the future can. I hope that one day you too will feel proud to see true value recognized here." Her words were neither retaliation nor a rehashing of old wounds, but a quiet reminder of growth, forgiveness, and the power to transform hate into motivation for change. Alicia then led her mother down the ground-floor corridor, past the portraits of the company's founders and row upon row of luxurious offices that had once been forbidden territory. Her new colleagues, those who had doubted her, now greeted them with smiles. Some even bowed in genuine respect to Martha Monroe, not as the janitor, but as the mother of a leader in whom the entire company had learned to place its trust. At the end of the hallway, Alicia stopped before the grand boardroom where she would, that very morning, take the director's seat. A seat once reserved for those with illustrious pedigrees or high-powered connections. She squeezed her mother's hand and said, voice thick with emotion, "Mom, I've saved a seat for you at the table of the most powerful people here. Today, I want you right by my side, so you know that every sacrifice, every tear, every late night you endured has never been in vain." Tears filled Martha's eyes as she embraced her daughter, a hug that spanned a lifetime's journey from the dark basement to the highest floors, from tears of endurance to tears of pride. She whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm proud of you, Alicia, not because you succeeded, but because you never let anyone extinguish your faith in yourself." The sight of the two of them standing together under the building's radiant lights, once a beacon of injustice and invisibility, now stood as a testament to a new reality. The triumph of an entire generation long overshadowed by prejudice, proving that intelligence and determination can overcome even the oldest barriers. News of their story rippled beyond those marble walls, Internal bulletins proclaimed, Bright Tech's first Black data audit director, Janitor's daughter, takes the helm. It inspired others who felt doomed to the bottom rung. The children of other cleaners watched quietly, realizing that their dreams too could come true if they dared to believe, to learn, and to rise. When the workday ended and afternoon light slanted through the tall windows onto their joined hands, Alicia felt a simple truth resonate in her heart. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't reaching the highest place, but bringing the people you love with you into that place, especially when it once seemed reserved for others. And so their story closed, not with applause or fanfare, but with a mother and daughter bathed in light, in a new world where true worth is finally honored, a fresh chapter of hope and recognition unfolding before them. If this story moved you, please like and share it with friends, and subscribe so you won't miss our next journeys of resilience and triumph. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next story.